Right, well this is part 3 of our day fishing series where we try to use a different method to catch a carp each time, all on the same lake. Unfortunately there's been a last minute change of venue forced upon us, so we're no longer at the lake that we have done the last 2 at, but we've now moved to another venue, 𝗏𝗁 Lake in Odium, where the sun's out and we're hoping to catch a carp off the top. Right, so I've chosen the swim that I'm going to start off in. Surface fishing for me is a very mobile pursuit, and we've turned up at the lake and it is pretty busy. There's a lot of people on. Thankfully, most carp anglers like to go on the end of the wind, whereas for surface fishing, I'd much rather be on the back of the wind. Reason for that is so that I can drift mixers out and cover a lot more water, whereas if the wind's coming back towards me, I'm basically only covering from as far as I can feed the mixers back towards me. So presentation's always a lot easier if I've got the wind off my back, and I can sort of almost trot, like trotting a stick float out, trot my controller out and cover a lot more water with the wind on my back. Now I've turned up, and one of the first swims I've come to, the wind's pushing right over the top of my head, and I've seen a couple of fish cruising about on the top. So hopefully I'll be able to feed some mixers and get some feeding on the surface. There's all sorts of surface fishing baits that will work, from bread, cat biscuits, specialised floating pellets. But my favourite to use is just plain old mixers. I don't go for the expensive branded ones. I just use bulk standard supermarket mixers, or sometimes what they call complete, like complete food. This is a complete food. This one's fine, but you do have to be careful with some of them, because some of them have some heavier like biscuits in there that will sink. So just be careful on which one you get. Those ones are fine. Other than that, it's just plain mixers. Now the reason I'm not using a branded one that have got maybe a bit more flavour and attraction in them is because I'm going to enhance them, dose them up, supercharge them if you will, to make them far more attractive to carp than they are straight out of the bag. So to do that, I'll start off by putting some in a bucket. You don't want to fill your bucket right up because you haven't got room to stir it around and what have you, so just half fill a bucket. They tend to come in like 4 kilo bags, and you can get a bag. About a whole bag will probably put the whole lot in. 2/3 of a bucket maybe, something like that. Now, liquids wise, world's your oyster. Sometimes I might use a little bit of neat flavour, but I do want to go steady with that because it's not going to get boiled like it will in a boilie. So all the flavour that you put in will end up in the baits. So I might put a few mil of flavour in. However, today I'm going to use, which is probably my favourite mix at the moment, and that's Smart Liquid. Now, the fish one is my favourite for mixers, no particular reason, it's just fishy flavours in summer seems to go, so I'll give them a good dose of that. Now, this is a really thick liquid, and it's one that you can't really overdo, so I can put plenty of that in. Messy business. I'll put that in, I'll give them a good shake up. I won't put my hands in quite yet because I'll get a load of it stuck all over my hands, then it's not going on the baits. So that's why you can see I haven't filled the bucket up, because I wouldn't be able to do that, they'd be going all over the place. And you just need that little bit of room in there so that you can agitate them properly. Another liquid I really like to use in the mixers is, if I can find it, multi-stim. Now that's it's like a sweet fruity liquid, but it doesn't sort of get rid of the fishy smell. It's not a strong smelling liquid, and again it's one that I can't overdo, so I can put plenty of that in there. I'll try and, rather than put it all in one spot, I'll try and like spread it about a little bit. Another shake up. If I've put too many in and I can't really agitate them properly, you can always just pop the lid on and then give them a proper shake. Now, this is normally something I do at home before I even go fishing. Reason for that is, what I would like is for all these liquids to soak right into the baits, so that they're not just sitting on the surface. So an overnight soak, ideal. or maybe on the morning before I go, just before I set off, so it's got a bit of time for those liquids to go in. Once they're soaked in, then I'll add some oil. You could put the oil on at the start, but I would rather have the oil on the outside, and all these, all the liquid foods, I would rather get right into the bait on the inside, so that they're there more as a taste profile, and then I want the oil more on the surface, so that that leaks off and stays on the surface to attract carp into the swim and to get them up off the bottom and feeding. Now, oil wise, doesn't really matter what oil I use. You can use supermarket oil. I like to use either hemp seed oil, or as we are in the height of summer, and we've got a fishy sort of vibe going on, I'm going to use 𝗏 oil, which is a really stinky fish meal or fishy smelling oil. And then again, I'll give that a liberal dose. Now, that's going to coat the surface of those, which will do me for sort of like the day's fishing. However, were I to come back again another day, all that oil will have soaked right into the bait. So I wouldn't then top up with all the other liquid foods again, because that's still in there. But I would always just give them a little refresh with some oil on the surface, just to coat the baits, so that it'll leak off nicely when they're introduced to the lake. There we go, ready to start feeding. One of the biggest pains when you're surface fishing is bird life. Now, there are various things you can do, and one of those things that I'm doing at the moment with this group of ducks is to try and feed them off. Now, there's no point in giving them dosed up mixers, so I'm just feeding them some plain mixers. Try and fill them up, and hopefully they're going to leave me alone after that. The vast majority of my floater fishing is done at relatively short range, so for that reason my main weapon for baiting is catapult. Now, your standard boilie or particle catapult is not the one for surface fishing. Mixers are pretty light, you know, they don't weigh a lot and they're small, so what I want is something more like a Matchman's type catapult, something with a nice soft elastic and a small pouch. Around about 10 mixers is what gives me the maximum range. 10 or 12 mixers in a pouch at a time, and due to the nature of surface fishing, so that's like baiting regular, little and often, you know, every couple of minutes, you are putting your catapult through a lot of stress, and eventually it does take its toll on the elastics. So it's always worth keeping a spares kit with you. I've got a spare pouch, spare elastic, and all the little clips that go with your catapult, just to make sure that you're not left with fish feeding and you're unable to put any bait to them. If I need a little bit more range, what you can do is to maybe separate a few mixers out into a different bucket, put a little bit of water with them. Now, they'll start to swell up and they'll take on the water, but they'll become heavier essentially, which enables you to get a little bit more range. Now, should I need more range than that, I'm then going to use either a SPOM. I prefer to use a small one just for less disturbance on the top, because when carp are on the top, you start crashing spods and SPOMs at them. They tend not to like it, so the minimum disturbance I can make, the better. And if I can't get the range with that, then I'll use like a pocket rocket type spod, an old-fashioned spod that I can actually fill with water to give ballast and a lot more range. Now, you'll often read advice on surface fishing that says you've got to wait till the fish are in a frenzy before you cast out. And whilst that might be true in some circumstances, possibly on a quite heavily stocked lake like we come on today, it's not always the case. And what I would say is a lot of the time, especially where birds are a problem, sometimes you have to realise that it's as good as it's going to get. Sometimes they're not that keen to feed on the surface when conditions aren't ideal. But other times, you know, something's always going to happen that will ruin your chances. Like swans might come in or seagulls might start diving and the chance will be gone. So what I would say is 9 times out of 10, if you think there's a chance of catching one, that's probably the time to cast out, rather than waiting and waiting and waiting, because sooner or later that chance might be gone. Now, something I'll always do when I'm surface fishing is to try not to crash the controller right in on top of the carp's heads. They're going to be sitting right up at the top of the water column, so any splash on the surface is going to be far more evident than it would be if they were down near the lake bed. So I'll always try and cast past where they are and then draw the float back gently in amongst the group of feeding fish. I'm just going to run you through the setup that I use for my surface fishing. I use a fairly soft rod, but probably not as soft as a lot of people use. Test curve that I like is around about 2¾ pounds, primarily because a lot of my fishing is in weedy lakes. So although I need something that's quite forgiving and is going to protect fine hook links and fine main lines, I need something that's got a little bit of backbone to extract carp from weed, or to stop them getting into snags and the like. So about 2¾ with a you know, reasonably forgiving action. Reel wise, to be honest, any reel will do. I use a small reel, but it doesn't have to be small. I've used bigger reels, big pit reels, and anything will do the job. The reason I just like a small one is because I'm holding the rod a lot of the time, so it's lighter and a little bit easier. Mainline wise, I've found there's a distinct advantage to using a line that floats. You know, a normal line will work, but you will have to constantly treat it to keep it on top of the water, whereas a line that actually floats, like a specific surface fishing line, I think offers plenty of advantages, because it doesn't go below the surface at all. This one actually floater, it's got a hollow core, so because it doesn't dip below the surface at all and just sits on the top, it means that I can mend the line easier. So it's almost like trotting a stick float down a river. So when the float's just like going through on the wind, I can just mend the line and get it going at exactly the right pace as the mixers go. And I think that is key to surface fishing, is getting your hook bait to behave just in the same way as your freebies do. If your line sinks, it can often be like going in the opposite direction, so your freebies might be drifting out, but your float's working its way back towards you. And it's very easy then for carp to pick out which is the rogue one, or maybe not pick it out, but not view it in the same way as they would the freebies, and so they won't feed on it quite so confidently. So coming down down the main line, I've got my controller float. Now, I've used all sorts of different controllers over the years, and I found that inline controllers, be they like short little ones like this or the longer stemmed ones, are far superior to the end-on ones. All I found with the ones that are attached on the end are that they just tangle city. Every cast almost, it's all twisted round. Whereas the inline ones very rarely tangle. I just find them really, really reliable. Close range, I'll use something small. I'll always use like the smallest type that I can get away with to get the range that I need, bearing in mind I'll be casting past where the fish are feeding. So maybe I want to go like 10, 15 yards past where they are. So I need a float that gets me that range relatively easily. Here today, I'm fishing pretty close in, so a small float like this will do. But when I need more range, I'll be using like a stemmed controller, something like this, which will go an awful lot further. Moving on to the hook link now. Rather than use what's sold as a main line, I use a purpose-made surface fishing hook link, Zig Link. Primarily, I'll use it in 8-pound breaking strain, but I've got 10 and 12-pound with me in case I'm fishing in heavier situations. Now, it's designed as a surface fishing line because it's very low visibility. It's got, although it's thin, it's got a good breaking strain for the diameter. So it's unobtrusive, but it's still pretty strong and will stand up to a fair bit of abuse. And moving on to what is probably the most important part of my surface fishing kit, and that's my hook. Now, I like to keep everything as simple as I possibly can when I'm surface fishing. I haven't got a kettle with me and stuff like that, so I don't want to be using shrink tube or anything like that. I just want everything as minimal as I can get it. I like to use a knotless knot for my surface rig, and for that reason I don't really want a hook that's got a downturned eye. If it's got a downturned eye, the knotless knot makes the gape close off a little bit, so I want a nice straight eye which keeps the gape open. My hook of choice is an incisor. It's a straight pointed, straight shanked hook, and it's not what's traditionally used as a surface hook is a very thin wire hook. It's not a thin wire hook, but I think that's an advantage because modern pop-ups, and certainly over the last few years, they've become more and more buoyant. Now I like to use a pop-up trimmed down as a hook bait. If they're too buoyant, I think that the hook bait doesn't behave quite like the freebies do. I want it almost the reverse of a critically balanced bait or a wafter. So I want it so it floats, but only just floats, so that when a carp sucks at it, it flies back into the mouth. The longer that hook's in the mouth, then the better the chance is of hooking the fish. Surface fishing rigs, by their nature, aren't probably the most efficient hookers, not like your bottom bait rigs, which twist and flip. So the longer that hook's in the mouth, the more chance I've got of making contact with the fish and of the hook point finding a purchase. I'm now going to go through the rig that I use for my surface fishing, which is nice and simple to tie, doesn't use many components, and I can get made quickly when I've got fish feeding in front of me. I'll start off by taking the length of my hook link. Now, I'll generally just go as far as my arms will reach, which is apparently your height. And by the time I've tied a couple of knots in that should give me a hook link of 5 foot or so. I'm going to use a simple knotless knot, but the difference with it, this setup, is that I use a doubled over hair. It's very similar to just a standard knotless knot. So I pass the line through, but then I'll take the tag end and go back through the eye again. So rather than a hair, which is like, like a single hair, I've actually got a loop, doubled over loop. And I need to blob the end, tag end, to stop it coming back through the eye. Now with these very fine hook links, it's really important to take extra special care to make sure you don't cause any damage to it when blobbing. I'll then form the loop so that it just kisses the bottom of the bend. I mean, I will sometimes adjust the length of the hair, tie it maybe a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. If I feel fish are getting away with it and I should be hooking more. You're always going to get some that do get away with it when you're surface fishing. It's just, it goes with the territory, but adjusting the hair length is one of the alterations that I might make. Then it's a simple case of tying a knotless knot. Now, that's another adjustment I might make, and that's adjusting the number of turns of the knotless knot. I'll go from like anything between 5 and 10, just to alter the point at which the hair leaves the hook. The further down, the better the turning effect. But also the longer the hair, the better the turning effect. So they're just small things that I might change if I feel like I'm getting done, if fish are, I'm getting a lot of aborted takes, or they're just not picking up the hook bait. Sometimes you can just change the angle that the hook sits at, or I don't really know why it might make a difference, but it certainly does. Another one would be, if I'm using like a fairly flat, like a topper as a hook bait, would be to, instead of piercing it widthways, would be to pierce it lengthways, just to make it sit differently. And sometimes these small things make a big difference. At the other end, I'll use a figure-of-8 loop knot to make a large loop so that I can attach it to my swivel loop-to-loop style, which is probably the quickest and most efficient way to change my hook link. So there we go, that's the finished rig. Very like just a standard hair rig, but the hair is 2 lengths of hair. It's like doubled over. And what that gives me is a bit more stiffness, but it also means that the hair is, the rigidity of the hair means it stands up a little bit more, and means it doesn't quite so easily get bent out of shape. So I might be able to catch 2 or 3 fish before I need to change the rig. And it's very important that my hook link floats. The reason for that is that if the hook link sinks, it will form a loop which draws the hook and the controller float towards each other. But to keep them separate, it's got to be floating. Now you'll notice after you've made up a few mixes of your like dosed up mixers, you'll notice that you get a film building up on the edge of your bucket. And this stuff is absolutely perfect to scrape a bit of the gunk off and then just run it along your hook link, and the oils that are contained within it keep your hook link floating on top of the water. Despite having them feeding really well, they've gone very cagey once there's a rig out there. I think I probably should have had a bite now, so I'm going to try a couple of little things first before I fine down a little bit. First off, I'm going to try a different colour hook bait. I'm using a yellow at the moment, so I'm going to try putting a pink or a white on and seeing if that makes any difference. Failing that, I might try finding the hook link down, maybe go down to an 8-pound breaking strain. Obviously, a 5 or 6 foot hook link is going to be a lot more tangle prone than your normal carp fishing rigs. So it's really, really important that when the float gets towards the end of its cast, that I do trap the line to kick the hook bait away and prevent it tangling. Now for floater fishing, I'm using fine, delicate lines, so I do need to protect those from any damage. When I'm feeding on a regular basis, I have to keep putting the rod down, so the line is susceptible to damage from bits of bankside metalwork or sleepers and what have you. So what I like to do, and you can do it if you've got a sided unhooking mat, is put the unhooking mat down, just stick the rod in that while I feed, and that just protects the line from any damage. I've had several casts with the yellow bait on there, and they just didn't seem interested in taking that at all, and I've changed over to a white, and straight away I've had a bite on that. Unfortunately, I've managed to pull the hook out close in, so I shall persevere with white for a little bit longer and see if I can get a take on that, and then if I can't, then I might try finding down then. But it does seem to be that they're taking all around, and it's only going to be a matter of time before one makes a mistake and takes the hook bait. I probably should have said at the very start of this video that surface fishing is one of the most exciting ways that you can go about catching a carp. But I would have to caveat that and also say it's one of the most frustrating ways there is of catching carp. As it is proving today, a lot of the time with surface fishing, you're just looking at very small windows when everything happens right. It's quite often that as your float just to the right of the swim and the fish are feeding on the left and vice versa, or they're feeding a little bit further out while your float's close. And it's just a case of waiting for everything to align, where you've baited exactly at the right time, because it's often easy to just bait a little bit too early before they're ready for the next pulpful. And then all of a sudden everything seems to align, and that's when you get your bite. And it looked like I was going to get one then, but that window looks to have closed now. And what you're witnessing now is one of the frustrations of surface fishing. There's fish feeding closer in and further out than where my float is. That is just the nature of it, and to be honest, it's probably what happens when you're just fishing on the bottom, but you just don't know about it. You don't see fish feeding beyond your rig, and you don't see them feeding a little bit shorter or left and right. I'm sure this is exactly the sort of thing that goes on, and you get your bite when one happens to feed in the right place. It's just that when you're surface fishing, you can see it all, and you can feel the frustration building. Something else I like to do is, every so often, just check that the hook balance of the hook bait's still okay. If a little bit's been chipped off where you've been casting, it can sink. So I want it to float, but only just. Having had 3 or 4 casts with fish feeding all around me, and none of them taking the hook bait successfully, I've decided to change for a pink one. I'm not sure quite why. Different colours seem to work differently, maybe different times of day, but they certainly do and can make a difference. It's a lot sunnier now, so I'm wondering whether the white's not showing up so well, or maybe showing up too well, I don't know. But I'm going to try a pink one. The Smart liquid that I put on my baits does turn a lot of them sort of a pinky colour anyway on the freebie. So a lot of the freebies have got a bit of a pinkish tinge to them. So we'll try putting a pink one on, see if that makes any difference. I've just gone a little bit further out. I was able to control the float a little bit better further out. It seemed to be the line close in was getting caught in an eddy, and it was pulling the float back towards me a little bit. But also the fish seemed to be feeling more confidently. There we go. It's only a little one. As soon as I've got a fish in the net, rather than unhook it straight away, I'll just leave it to chill for a minute and feed a little bit more, just to try and keep them interested while I'm unhooking it. Well, he's only a little one, but he's very welcome on a day where they've really been frustrating me. And he's living proof that changing things can make a difference. Eventually, this one's tripped up by me changing to a pink hook bait. Just a little pink topper, which gives me the perfect balance of a hook bait. That was obviously to his liking. Most of the time when I'm surface fishing, my hook bait will be some form of pop-up. My go-to is going to be one that's a very similar colour, so I match the hatch type pop-up. Dog biscuits and 𝗃, very, very similar colour, so I tend to use a 𝗃 pop-up in 15mm size. Now, obviously, they're a lot bigger than a freebie, and they're going to be a lot more buoyant, so I need to make it smaller and make it look more like a mixer. So what I'll do is just cut it in half, and then square off the edges to make it more of a mixer appearance. Now, what that does, not only does it make it look much more like a mixer, the mixers that I'm putting out, but it gives it a similar sort of buoyancy. I don't want my hook bait to be too buoyant. I want it to sit on the surface layer, but you know, if I were to drop it in, I want it to sink down below so that when a carp sucks at it, it disappears right into the mouth with relative ease. Otherwise, it's so easy for them to have a tentative suck at the bait and it doesn't go into the mouth like the freebies will, and then they know it's a rogue one and it will be avoided. Another hook bait option that I use quite a lot, and that's a topper. They come in various colours, and what's really, really good about these is that they're already squared off, so they have a mixer type appearance shape-wise, but their buoyancy is absolutely bang on. I don't have to chop these down at all, so if I need to get a hook bait out in a hurry, I can just thread one of these straight on, and I know that I've got just the right buoyancy to balance my hook. Now, this is my last hook bait option, and it's one that I sort of keep for when it really matters. These are my very favourite floater fishing hook baits. If you've got any old pop-ups from a few years back, don't bin them, keep hold of them, keep them for your surface fishing. They haven't got as much buoyancy as modern pop-ups have got. Modern pop-ups are very much more buoyant than they used to be. Now, that's generally a good thing in fishing, but for surface fishing, they can be too buoyant. So if you've got some really old ones that haven't got quite the buoyancy, these are absolutely perfect. It means I can have maybe a slightly larger hook bait, but still without it being too buoyant. That's another little one off the top, pink hook bait again. So that's definitely the way to go, I think, for today for these. Felt like a better fish when I first hooked it, but he is only a little scamp. A pretty little fish. And time enough to see if I can catch one more. Well, there's the biggest one of the day so far, and the first common that we've caught. Slight change on the hook bait colour to an orange this time. There's still a coloured one, but there were a few fish getting away with it. It had quite a lot of aborted takes, so I mounted it lengthways so that it was like much tighter to the back of the shank. Whether that made the difference or not, I don't know, but certainly didn't do any harm. Well, it's been a really enjoyable day's fishing, even if it was a little frustrating. It's probably quite typical of surface fishing. Some days you can get lots of bites and catch plenty when they're not feeding that strongly. Other days they can be feeding really strongly and it just doesn't seem to happen. Whether that's light levels or what, I don't know. But I've still enjoyed my time, and hopefully I've shown you that it is possible to catch them off the top, and at least we've completed our mission for the third time on the trot, catching a carp in a day. Next time we'll be at the same venue and hoping to catch one by stalking.